Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
What happens in Vegas goes all over the world on Black Entrepreneur Experience, episode number 33. Thank you for joining us for Black Entrepreneur Experience. This is where we shine the light on the most successful Black entrepreneurs in the world. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards, and I am so deeply honored to have with me today Ida Bryd-Hill. She's the president of Uplift Inc, where what her job is she's looking to reduce the digital talent shortage. It's a nonprofit tech diversity and inclusion firm. You know, Ida, I have given our audience a very short bio about you. Why don't you fill in the gaps? And why don't you tell us about yourself and your company?
Yes. Our work is surrounding the tech diversity issue that is occurring in America. We realized that there was going to be an issue about 15 years or so ago because technology is really rapidly growing, and a lot of things that are manual are now becoming, as I call, automated. And therefore, with that becomes new jobs. But we realized a few years ago that a lot of the African Americans were not being prepared for those jobs because of the way that a lot of our schools are situated. Most of them don't teach computer science. They don't really teach mathematics in the way that the computer or tech industry looks at it. And so therefore, they kind of have frozen our young people out of that industry. So we decided about 15 years or so ago that we were going to take up that mantle and try to close that gap as quickly as possible because we could see that it was going to be quite an issue. So most of our programming relates to automation and mathematics, and trying to get not only the young people ready for that world, but their parents. Because truthfully, their parents are the ones who are being kind of frozen out because a lot of their jobs have been, as we call, turned into robotics. And so they need to be able to figure out a way of how to be able to get a job and in this area and be able to have the training to be able to get a job as it relates to that whole automation piece. So that's what we do. So all of our time is spent in creating programming that relates to automation and robotics and mathematics. And so that's what we do all day.
So you had talked about parents and also students. Is there an age group that you focus on in terms of your programs, or is it open to all ages?
Our program is actually open to all ages, but what we noticed, what's attracted to us, because every business, including a nonprofit, has constituencies that falls into a certain target market. And the individuals that we work with most are ages 34 to 54, mainly females. And that's kind of what we're attracted to. And I kind of think a lot of that has happened because I fit within that age bracket as a president of Uplift Inc. And so they kind of follow where my age fits in. And so I'm about 50, a little over 50. And so we noticed that we attract mainly women in that age bracket. Our goal for students, though, is those who are teenagers. We tend to don't do anyone usually below 12 because we're trying to get them when they're becoming very brilliant and where we see the need in the schools. And so usually the young people are anywhere from 12 to 18, but their parents could be in any age.
I remember you had mentioned about 15 years ago in the .com. I was a part of the .com industry, and we're running about the same age. I'm probably a little bit older. I'm a boomer. And I remember when they were talking about Jesse Jackson was doing this push for Blacks in the field of in the tech industry, diversity in the tech industry, and they talk about Silicon Valley. Over the 15 years, have you seen the gap? Is it wider or has it shrunk?
I would say the gap is wider, and there's a reason for that. Mark Andreas, which is the famous VC, says this famous quote that software is eating the world for lunch.
Wow.
And it's a true statement because everything has moved from manual to automation. The software industry is growing quite rapidly, and it has no boundaries because anything can be automated at any given moment. So I see that the gap has widened because the demand for the software has grown while the people that are actually servicing that area may not have moved at the same pace. So what I'm seeing is that it has grown, truthfully.
So tell me this, Ida, how did you decide this was the business for you that you said you saw 15 years ago about specifically African Americans, our children, our family being kind of left behind in the tech industry? Was there a situation or an incident that happened that gave you this aha moment?
Actually, it was. I had a son who at the time was about 10, maybe 11. And he had said to me one day, he says, Mama, why do I have to go to school? And I says, why you ask? He says, well, they lecture for 6 to 7 hours a day. And I really could go online and learn what they taught me in 2 hours and use the other 5 hours to do something else. And that got me thinking, yeah, why do you have to go to school? And why do you have to be lectured to, right? So immediately thereafter, our nonprofit had gotten a contract to do an alternative high school. And that school was an actual cyber school where everything the young people did, everything was online except for their projects. So in essence, the school had no textbooks because everything was on a computer. And so I got that from my son because the question was, if you could go online and you could get YouTube videos or you can get videos someplace else and you can get content someplace else, why did the teacher have to stand in front of a classroom and lecture?
A very brilliant son. And what is he doing today?
He is in a 4th year of a 5th-year program at Rochester Institute of Technology, where he's getting a bachelor's in information technology. So truthfully, my work is aligned with his going into that BS in information technology to pretty much pioneer and carve the way so that he can easily get into the industry.
That's brilliant. So, Ida, tell us, how do you define success? What does that look like to you?
Well, it depends on the year that you asked me. When I opened up the school in 2006, that was success for me. To do this project that nobody else had done in the country and to do it with African American males who at the time mostly were drug dealers, that was success for me. But now I'm at a whole different space. Success for me today is that I'm on a path to try to create an invention lab where people can do all type of projects that are tech oriented. So if they decide they want to take a class online, they can come there and do it. They decide they want to create a prototype for a software project, they could come to the center and do that. If they decided they want to do training for a workforce development program so they can get a different type of job, whether it's in software or whether it's in places like CNC machining or if it's in robotics, where they can come to that center as a job. So right now, my mantra is to build this invention lab, and success for me would not be just to build one. I really want to build one in the 20 top cities where African Americans live in their community so they could see this future technology firsthand, not just on a video on a computer screen. So that's my definition of success today.
So share with our audience, what is a daily or a weekly habit that you do consistently that has given you the greatest success?
I plan my day every evening. So before I go to bed at night, I know exactly what I'm going to do when I get up in the morning. People go, why? Because it makes my day very fruitful. So when I wake up, I hit the ground running because I know exactly what I need to achieve before I went to bed last night. And I've done that for 30 some odd years and it has worked for me. So I said that's a habit, and it's a time management habit that I think that everybody should adopt. That you should know before you go to bed what your plans are for the next day.
So what is one valuable lesson you wish you knew before starting your business?
I would say my biggest lesson that I learned is that before you do any business, no matter how wonderful the project is or product that you're going to sell, you need to know where your money is coming from. And I mean who your actual customer is, who's writing the check. And I specifically say that because in the nonprofit space, a lot of times we don't look at those as being businesses, but they are businesses. They're actually two-tier businesses. They serve a constituency who pays no money, but they also have donors and grantors who actually write the check. And that is really the customer. And so my thing is to know exactly who is your customer, not who's your user, because that may be a different group of people, but who actually writes the check to keep you in business? And if I had to do it all over again, I would have approached that area a little bit differently because it had a totally different result than what we're getting today.
So speaking of that, if you said you had to do it all over again, would you actually go into the same business that you're in now, or would you shift gears?
I would shift gears. Although nonprofit work is rewarding, the nonprofit model is not. I don't really like the whole concept of how you raise cash to get something done. So if I was to do it over again, I would probably not use the nonprofit model. I would probably be more of a social enterprise model and figure out a way to have created a product that actually people are paying for that still helps my constituency. With that being said, about a couple years ago, we actually did open a social enterprise where we're in the middle of creating some software that will serve the constituency that we serve, but actually would find a different way to get paid. And so I would not do the nonprofit model at this if I had to do it all over again.
So what's keeping you going in the nonprofit?
Well, what's keeping us going is because, once you get something started, I believe you should not stop until you're finished. And so if you decide on a goal that you have set for yourself, your business, the people around you, that if you set it, you make it happen. When you make it happen, then you walk away. So when we started this process, my whole goal was to eventually create a group of invention labs in schools around the country. And since I haven't hit that goal just yet, I probably won't stop until we do. And my whole, at the end of the day, what we wanted to do was to have these 20 invention labs that eventually will turn into 20 high schools that will board students in the 20 different cities in which they live. So if I have a kid who's struggling with the environment here in Detroit and they need to get out of that environment, I could send them to our invention lab school in Miami and board them there and get them out of their environment so that we can change the space that they're involving in and change their headspace, to be truthful. So until we are able to get that complete, we'll probably be at this for a little bit because we haven't achieved that success quite yet.
So Ida, take us back to this journey. You had mentioned you started the nonprofit about 15 years ago. Have you always been into the entrepreneurial space, or how did you get into that?
I actually have always been in the entrepreneurial space because my dad is an entrepreneur. And he owned a trucking firm for as long as I can remember. So I have been entrepreneurial for a long time, but I haven't always been in the nonprofit space. The truthful part about it, I was a wealth manager. I managed money. So for about 10 years of my life, I owned a wealth management firm, built it from zero assets under management to 353 million assets under management. But one of the things that really kind of bothered me a lot is that I was making a lot of people wealthy, but I never saw that money going into organizations in my community. And at the end of the day, you want to be able to have some impact on the community in which you live. And I just didn't feel that even though the firm had grown in asset size, I did not see my clients, who were mainly African American, doing nonprofit or social type activities in our community. Truthfully, what I was seeing is that I would make them wealthy and they would go make a donation to your status quo Caucasian organizations that help Caucasians rather than people in my community. And that's kind of how I got here, because I really wanted to be able to see some things happening that changed the life for people in the community in which I lived.
Ida, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to throw this out. I need to connect you with a gentleman that I interviewed on the show, and you guys have similar backgrounds, and he has an app, and the app is, he came from wealth building, like he was a financial advisor. And he has a similar story with you in terms of he helps nonprofits with his app raise money. So I will give you that information when we get off the phone for you to connect with him. I think that it may be a win-win for both involved.
Yeah, and that would be wonderful. We're always trying to connect to someone because we just believe that business is a relationship with people.
Right. And that's all business is. Absolutely. So where do you see the direction of the nonprofit within the next 2 years?
Well, right now we have embarked on a project to not only educate people in our community, but to educate corporate America about people in our community. So a couple weeks ago, I actually launched a book that's entitled Invisible Talent Market. And that book it's an economics history guide of Blacks, dating back to slavery today, to educate corporate America on the culture of where we are. And let me tell you why we wrote the book. Whenever you talk to individuals in corporate America, they want Black people to be like them. And when we don't behave like them, they make us seem like there's something wrong with us. And what my discussion is that we're not going to behave like you because we don't have your history. We have our own history. And so what needs to happen is you need to understand our history and get to learn us as we are and not try to make us fit into your box because we don't fit your box because we don't have your history. So if you want our money, you need to stop trying to put us in a box and get to learn about who we are and what we bring to the table and how best it suits you. Because what we don't talk about a lot in this country, we're having a talent shortage, they say, in the digital area. Black people have solved every talent shortage that America has ever had, starting with slavery, with the agricultural revolution. Then we left there and went to the industrial revolution. We solved all of their talent shortages during the wars. But this particular talent shortage that's in the digital revolution, they have basically said we're not good enough to solve that talent shortage. And so we try to address that in the book. So what we see ourselves going further is to be a facilitator of dialogue, to start having this conversation, particularly since people of color are going to be the majority population by 2044, that this conversation and dialogue must happen. But right now it's not happening. We evade a lot of the discussion as it relates to Blacks' history. And even sometimes we as Black people don't really talk about our history. It's almost like we're kind of ashamed of our history, not realizing it is what has made us who we are. And it has made us be the powerhouse that we tend to be. The third thing that we're trying to do is educate in the book is to get businesses to understand that doing business with us is not the right thing to do. It's the economic thing to do, because as a people, we have grown substantially in revenue. This year, we're going to eclipse about $1.3 trillion of income, which is the size of Mexico or 2/3 the size of Canada. Yet mainstream does not treat us like the powerhouse that we tend to be. So we see ourselves as being this dialogue convener throughout the country, to have this dialogue with corporations about what you need to do to have a better relationship with us if you want our money.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. So, Ida, talk to a younger you. What advice would you give to a younger Ida?
I would say the advice I would give to a younger Ida would be, first of all, know who you are. The one thing that and I have probably learned it as I've gone over the years, we tend not to, as a people, know our identity of what we bring to the table. And when you know who you are and what you bring to the table, you really don't accept a lot of the things that people say and do to you. Because one of the things that I've noticed is like we've had a lot of police brutality in the country the last few years. And I read some quote that from slavery all the way up to 2014, we averaged about 40 lynchings a year. But in the last 50 years, we've averaged about 140 police brutalities where people have actually been killed. That's a lot. And part of it is because people have identified and created an identity for us that may not necessarily be true. And I give you a good example. When people see us, the first thing they assume is that we are a criminal. Where that came from, I have no idea. But we have allowed that stereotype to keep going without actually addressing it. And until we address it and deal with it, it's never going to go away.
You know, Ida, in your conversation, you have really pointed out like a lot of challenges within the Black community and the whole diversity issue, the whole diversity piece. And I think that it's a lot of things that has happened in our culture. And I agree with you when you pointed about your book about the invisible talent market. And I think that what has happened is I look at a lot of other cultures that have come to the United States, and they continue to know who they are. And one of the things that the Jewish culture has said about the Holocaust is that from a very young age, they teach the young Jewish kids, it's a requirement about the Holocaust, because they said it'll never happen again. I agree with you that we as African Americans, we don't know our history, and so if we want to say the system or whomever, the man, whoever has done a job on us, they have really done a job on us. And that's what we're wanting to do at Black Entrepreneur Experience. We want to abolish and abort that myth that we are brilliant as individuals. And a gentleman, I believe, was on the podcast, and he said something about African Americans, that we are disruptors. Anything that we master, we really master it. In sports, whenever they let us into something, we take it over and we dominate. And that's what we have to do as African Americans. We have to dominate entrepreneurship. We have to go back to understanding who we really are. And I think that that is the key. If you don't know where you come from, you don't know your history, you're bound to So I agree with you 100%. Whatever we need to do as a society, as African Americans, as mothers, as aunts or whomever, we have to keep that hope alive that we can build ourselves up. We can bring back Black Wall Street in each and every one of our cities, but we have to change that mindset and realize that we cannot get into the mindset of the society thinking, pouring into us all this negativity, that we are criminals, that we are brilliant in math and science. And so they feed us that we are dumb and we can't learn math and science, but that is our culture. If you think about it, that is our DNA, doing things that is pertaining to math and science. But we keep buying the stories that they tell us. And what happens is we have a tendency of not pulling ourselves up and realizing who we really are and that we can really do it.
And part of it is because if you don't know your culture, what actually started us down this path is that when we had piloted a school for DPS, Detroit Public Schools, and it closed, and we went to go get a charter. So we got a grant to do the curriculum, but then we couldn't get a charter to open a charter school. And what irritated me to no end is that the school's name was going to be called Invent Tech Academy. And we chartered all of the universities who do charter schools, but one actually was truthful, says, Ida, you're not going to get a charter. I go, why not? Because we don't believe Black people invent. And I hit the roof because Black people invented. And what we don't talk about, the truth of the matter, is one of the reasons why we had the Civil War was not because Abraham Lincoln really wanted to free the slaves. He was unlocking the invention spirit of Black people because they needed it for the Industrial Revolution. See, we forget that when you look at the minute that slavery ended in 1862, the Industrial Revolution took off in the same year. But we don't talk about that because we really don't know our history. So the battle of the Civil War wasn't because it was the right thing to do. They needed Black people to fuel the Industrial Revolution. And we did fuel it. A lot of our patents still survive today. I mean, when you look at things that are very basic, like the furnace, there's a furnace in every household and every business in America. That furnace was invented by a Black woman by the name of Alice Parker. When you look at air conditioning, because it's hot here today and most people have on their air conditioning, we owe that invention to Fred Jones, who's also a Black man. But what happens, because we don't know our history, we don't know the patents that our people suffered to get those patents and what they bring to the table, people can tell you anything. So yes, we are disruptors. We are, which is a nice way to say we are inventors. But what has happened, because Caucasian people and Europeans know we're inventors. They kill our kids when they're young. See, when you go into a schoolhouse to say you are a disruptor, schools look at that as someone who is a behavior issue. And really, as a disruptor, you somewhat are. You're disrupting status quo. And so in order to make it in business as an entrepreneur, you have to disrupt status quo. So if I kill that spirit in you young, then that means when you get older, you're not going to disrupt status quo. That's how you make your money. So they kill our children young by killing that spirit in them. So they can't be inventors, so they can't be entrepreneurs, because it requires that skill of disrupting status quo. So I agree.
That is some good information. I love that. So with you being in the tech space, what is a technology tool or a technology platform, Ida, that is a must-have for you in managing your business and or your life?
Well, for me, the piece of software that I use the most is a customer relationship management platform, or they call it CRM. I try not to remember a lot of things. I plug it into the CRM software, who I need to contact and where we are with our projects, because it keeps me on task. Because we are a small nonprofit, unfortunately, we don't hire a lot of people because we have technology. It keeps us all organized and where we're going and what we need to do. So that CRM, or customer relationships management software, is that's my favorite. Secondly, we all use the email, even though they say email is dead. I don't think it's ever going to die, because it's a good way to communicate. We used to communicate by mail, then we used to communicate by fax. Now we communicate by email. We may have other ways that will eventually communicate, but it would be some form of email, whether it's a messenger type app or it's a messenger type platform. So those are the two that I use is a CRM and in email.
So let's shift gears for a minute. Let's talk about risk and or failure. What is the worst moment in business, and what was the takeaway?
Well, my worst moment in business is that I had completed a project and they owed me a third of the revenue of the project, and they wouldn't give it to me, which was my profit. And so the lesson that I learned from that is never have that much of your profit outstanding. Your accounts receivable, sometimes when you're small, you tend to be paid last. You have to accelerate those accounts receivable at all costs. You have to decide how much money you're going to let a client hang out there, and you just keep it really close to the vest. So the lesson that I took away from that, which I'm there now, if from providing a service and it's a large company and they want to have a long time to pay, I don't give them that long time to pay, because I need my profit in the door as quickly as possible. And so that's the lesson I learned from that. And so today there's a couple clients that, while I love servicing them, I can't service them because they pay terrible. So at this point I don't. And hopefully they would make my business grow bigger, but at the same time they would cause me a nightmare because collecting money from them is terrible.
So talk to the person in our audience that they want to start a business, they're fearful. What advice would you give them?
I would say that when you start any business, you need to sit down and look at where the business is going to go. But the first thing you need to discover is, who are my paying clients? How am I going to make money? Because if you're not making money, you don't have a business. You have an idea, but what turns an idea into a business is that you're able to generate revenue. So the first thing I would do is that no matter what you're doing, is decide, how am I going to make my money? And then how do I make my money easiest? Because sometimes you can make money and it could be difficult money to make. And I'll give you a good example. Earlier in the conversation, I said I wouldn't do the nonprofit model, because the nonprofit model builds on the issue that you have to be in the clique with those who are funders. If you're not in the clique with the funders, you have a difficult time making money. So if I had to do it all over again, I would sit down and say, okay, I want to be able to serve my community, but how is it easiest for me to make money? And had I thought that through, I would not have landed in the nonprofit space. I would have looked at something that was able to generate money from those who have money, but at the same time be able to provide that money to provide services to constituents in my neighborhood to be able to help them. So that's the first thing, is to find out how you're going to make money, whatever product or product that you serve, and you know that from the minute that you open a business of where your first dollar is going to come from and where your substantive dollars are going to come from, because without that, you're not in business. The second thing I would look at is that whenever you create a product or project, you may not always be the entrepreneur who's going to manage it or take it forth. Every product or service that you make, you should give yourself two options. Either I put the product and service into play myself, or I license that product and service to someone else. I think oftentimes we don't think about the licensing aspect, but licensing a product could be just as large as running it yourself. And I'll give you a good example. Lonnie Johnson, who is a physicist, discovered an invention called the super soaker water gun. He actually discovered it, well, actually I shouldn't say he discovered it, his child discovered it while he was doing a physics experiment and said, wow, that would be a great water gun. So instead of just letting it go to the side, he created and patented the actual water gun, but he himself does not produce the water gun. He sold it to a toy company. And every year he generates about $200 million in revenue from his license. So he didn't manufacture it. He's not distributing it. He actually licensed it to the company, and they produce it and distribute it, and he just collects his money. That to me is a better model, but a lot of times we don't think about that model because no one ever talks to us about creating a patent and then licensing the technology to someone else. So I think that, you can look at entrepreneurship can be one or the other. It's just not you doing everything yourself. And so my thing is, I think as a new person is to sit down and look at that. Which model is best for me? Is it best for me to put my hands in it and make it go myself? Or do I create a technology where I could sell it to someone else and then collect the proceeds from selling that license?
Yes, and I read the story about It's Amazing, the super gun, water gun, and he had been tied up in litigation and he won that settlement. So I was very glad to hear that. So tell us, Ida, what book would you recommend and why?
Well, the one book that I actually read once a year, every year for the last 30 years, and that book was called Think and Grow Rich. It was written by Napoleon Hill back in 1928, so it's a very old book. It has morphed into different versions. One of them was done by Dennis Kimbrough, which is Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice. Those two books I would recommend people read. To me, business is something that you do in your headspace, day in and day out. And I find that most people tend to fall out of business, not because they're not generating revenue per se. That's a symptom. They fall out of business because they don't have longevity. And that's because of what goes on between their two ears. Business is about the mentality that you have and what you're trying to achieve. And if you don't believe in yourself, then your business will never be what it needs to be. Now, does that mean you're not going to have challenges? No, it does not. You're going to have challenges. The issue is, can you live through the challenges, learn the lesson, and keep going? And oftentimes we don't do that. So I read those two books because I know that life is going to have failure. You should learn from your failures. You should have lots of failures because problems are solved through failures. You learn something new, you create a new solution. That may be the product that takes you over the edge. So I read those two books once a year, every year, usually at the beginning of the year, to make sure that my headspace is right for that year, because I know that I'm going to go through some issues where I'm going to win some, but I know that I'm going to lose probably more than I win. And all I'm going to count is the wins.
Very good information. So, Ida, if you conducted this interview, what is the one question that you wish I would have asked you? And I would like you to ask the question and give us the answer.
The question that I was surprised you didn't ask, because right now, a lot of business people don't go into business because of the lack of capital. And so the question I want to ask is, what capital do you use to run your business? And so I'm going to answer that question. Nonprofits have just as much struggle to get capital as everybody else. Even though we're raising money from funders and foundations, it usually never always comes in the way that we want it to or the timing that we want to. And so sometimes in raising capital, you have to look at some very creative ways and how do you get your money. And I'll give you a good example. A couple years ago, my son was talking about Bitcoin. And I was like, well, explain it to me. And I really wasn't understanding it. I says, okay. So he went and invested some money in Bitcoin, this specific Bitcoin called Ethereum, and his little $50 turned into $1,500, right? And I went, that's interesting. He goes, why is that interesting? I said, because I'm going to give you some money, because the way that our nonprofit works, sometimes we get money, sometimes we don't. I need you to be able to invest in that Ethereum, because if it's moving at that rate of return, then I need to be able to have a buffer. So this year, I gave my son that money, which is a very risky investment, I must tell people, so that I would be able to have an endowment for the nonprofit. Well, I only gave him like a couple $1,000s, and already we're up to about $60,000 for the year. So for me, that's a new way to be able to get capital. We're investing as a nonprofit to be able to have our endowment. Now, is that normal for little nonprofits? It's not. But it's very normal for large nonprofits like Harvard University. They invest their money to get more money. So sometimes you have to look at, how do I get my capital? It may not be in the traditional way. You figure out what works for you. Now, I could bear risks because, as I said, I'm a previous wealth manager, so I understand risk and reward. I can probably take more risks than most other people. But I think that you need to be able to look at, how do I get my capital to be able to keep my business going? And sometimes it may be loans, and sometimes it may not be. I decided that I'm not taking out a loan at this juncture in my life. Maybe for a future business I would, but not right now. And so I think every business owner needs to look at, well, how do I get the capital to start my business? And right there, that's a problem. If you solve it, that's the $1 million problem. How do I get the capital to keep my business running? That right there may be a solution that may benefit a whole lot of entrepreneurs throughout the years. But I don't think we ever ask that question. We just go into it and says, oh, I can't get capital. Yeah, that may be true, but figure out a way how you can get capital to keep your business running.
That was really good information. And a takeaway from that was not just in reference to your son. We talked about earlier that you had kind of instilled in him the whole tech, and we see where he's in school, but also the lesson that you've given him is about investment, about risk, about finance. And so I think that's really brilliant that you share that story with us about your son. You're on the wealth management side, but he has also taken away that information that you've trained him to be really brilliant. So that's great. And thinking outside the box. And I like that question. And I have actually added it to my list to ask others about the whole capital side of running their business. So thank you for that. So Ida, what is a parting piece of advice you want to offer to our audience?
I would say, and not to be a shameless self-plug, but it is a shameless self-plug. I think that in order for business to grow, and particularly women, do not share their story well enough. You have to pat yourself on the back and be bold enough to tell your story, because all of us have a story. And how you tell your story determines the success that you have. Right now, I'm telling my story in the middle of a book called Invisible Talent Market, which is on Amazon. So if you really want to know a little bit about me, you can go on Amazon and buy a book. But I think that as a business person, you have to be your marketing 101 guru to be shamelessly tell your story. Because if you don't tell it, no one else is going to tell it. And I just think that a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we're not really good about telling our story, particularly in our community, because we consider that bragging. Yes, it is bragging. But if you don't brag on yourself, who will? And that's how you make business grow, by telling your story. And being able to tell it, whether it's in a visual format, whether it's in an audio format, or whether it's in a printed format like a book. You got to be shameless at it. And you got to do it, and you got to do it well, and you got to do it often, because that's what makes your business grow.
Thank you. So we've come to the part of our podcast interview. It's called the Fun Fact Lightning Round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to give very quick answers. If it's something that you choose not to answer, feel free to say pass. Are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready.
All right, Ida. The last movie you saw?
Wonder Woman.
You relax doing what?
Reading.
Your favorite singer or rapper?
Beyonce.
Your favorite dance song?
Hustle. Any type of hustle.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Kiwi.
And your favorite month?
My birth month, October.
Thank you for that. So thank you so much, Ida, for spending time with us. Can you share with our audience what is the best way for them to connect with you?
They can always connect with me at our website, which is upliftinc.org. And it has all of our contact information there. And that's Uplift, upliftinc.org. And that's the best way to reach us. We usually respond to any emails that we receive, any phone calls, as I said, because business is done based on relationships. And we're always trying to build relationships with people all over the world.
Ida, thank you so much for joining Black Entrepreneur Experience. And if you would like to connect with Ida, you can check her out on upliftinc.org. That's a wrap. Thank you, Ida.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.